All right, guys. So we have a screencast here for effects of Chinese Civil War. Just making sure the recording is actually working here. So effects of Chinese Civil War. Here's our screencast on this. Mr. Horseman and I are not here today, so we're making sure we get you the information you need. When we look at this again, we have some pictures we've thrown up here. Guys, please, pause this screencast right now. Talk at your table for maybe 2-3 minutes. What are you seeing? What connections can you make? What ideas are here when you connect them to the readings you've done? And interestingly enough, you are not seeing immediate effects of Chinese Civil War pictures. Now, first off, there was not a whole lot of technology going on, obviously, in the fronts of the war of Chinese Civil War. But, I would also talk at your table briefly. Why aren't we seeing lots of effects of Chinese Civil War pictures that I can place on a screencast or a PowerPoint for you to talk about? So honestly, if you could pause this and take 2, 3, 4 minutes to talk at your table, ideas, thoughts, gear yourself in, and we will continue. All right, so hopefully you paused and talked about that. Here is what we have. We have the essential question for this lesson. The overriding impact of 20th century wars was massive political upheaval in regards to 2 total wars of the 20th century. To what extent do you disagree with this statement, guys? Disagree being the key word here. Also, remember what we talked about. Don't blindly agree with the question, not the statement, the question as a whole. So when we look at this, you're going to have to think 2 total wars. We have, of course, World War II, we have Cuban Revolution, and we have Chinese Civil War. So, think of what 2 words you would want to use. This question is going to encompass your exit understanding in a group for this lesson. So you want to think about this the whole time we go through. So keep that in the back of your mind. And what I would do right now is, again, pause the screencast. How would you answer this question at your table? 2, 3, 4 minutes. How would you answer, and with what wars would you feel most comfortable doing it? Because again, this will connect to your exit activity. Please pause and talk about it. Okay, so hopefully you paused again. So when we look at the effects of a war, it is always in relation to the fighting of the war itself, and especially for a lot of wars, especially Civil War, you have to look back to the causes. Because if you understand the causes, then the effects get somewhat easier to understand. We talk about that causal relationship. Well, in a Civil War especially, maybe not so much in interstate wars. And if you think about World War II, maybe think what I mean, because you're going to pause and talk again at your table. But in Civil Wars, the causes of the war within the country are going to equal probably some of the effects. So when we look at this, think what were the major causes of the Chinese Civil War? Well, we talked about this. We had the influence of foreigners. We had your spheres of influence. We had, your carving up of China for trade purposes by Britain, by outside European influences, which led to the rise of nationalism. You had your fall of the Qing dynasty, which created that power vacuum that we discussed. We had the massive social issues that came from the fall of dynastic rule, the warlord period, that came from foreign influence. You talk the Opium Wars, the opium addiction, and then you talk all the other social issues of starvation and poor health care and poor literacy rate and poor education, and then you have, again, the corruption and poor local leaders that led to a lot of those socio-political, socio-economic issues. This is going to be the cause of the Civil War. Both the CCP and the KMT are saying they are going to solve these influences, these causes, I should say. They're going to get rid of foreign influence. They're going to get rid of the power vacuum and unite the country under one powerful national government. And by doing those 2 things, they will be able to address the social, political, and economic issues the country are facing. So when we look at this, also, it wasn't a modern nation. Please remember that. Mao is going to have a little thing to say about that post-war. So, questions we should ask ourselves. Should the winner fix these causes? Well, if it's a civil war, one would think definitely, because the people are fighting to support a group that will, in fact, fix the issues plaguing the nation. should the winner create a stability so the issues that cause the war don't rise up again? Well, don't you think they should? Sometimes it works. Look at China. Look at Cuba. They haven't had a civil war since the Cuban Revolution and the Chinese Civil War. We have to ask why that is. But there's other countries we could talk about, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, who have gone through numerous civil wars, countries in Latin America, numerous power shifts, power changes. So obviously sometimes the creation of stability does not happen. Well, should you create an effective government if you're fighting a civil war or thereby any war? Look at World War II. We look at the Treaty of Versailles. Did it create an effective government in Germany? Not really. I think the Weimar, we could say, was not super effective for numerous reasons. Not their own fault either. But post World War II, I think you see after some years, you do create some very effective governments in the losing countries. Is there anything we're missing here? That the causes of a war should equal what we can see as effects. What I would have you do again at your table, 3, 4, 5 minutes, pause this, talk about the Cuban Revolution. What were the causes of the war? Did the winner fix those problems? Talk about World War II. Now, World War II was in an interstate, international conflict. So, were the questions that we're going to answer the same? The winner fixed the causes. Well, in a civil war, it absolutely, positively should be. In an interstate war, that gets a little more touchy. So, when you discuss World War II, discuss the causes of the war, as we've been doing. Do these questions fit? If they do, to talk about the effects of World War II. Did the war fix those causes for the winners? Did the winners fix those causes for the losers, I should say? Or do we need new questions for interstate wars? Or do we just need more questions for interstate wars? Talk about that again, 3, 4 minutes, talk about these ideas, gearing your mind into these things. Again, comparison of two wars, because now we're looking at the last lesson of Chinese Civil War. We really want to look at these wars as a whole now, World War II, Cuban Rev, Chinese Civil. So we have a big overall view, case study approach, almost we would say, and we can look at them in totality. So if you could pause, talk 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then continue. All right, so when we look at this, we're going to go at this from more of a PEMS issue, a PEMS idea. What were the political effects of the Chinese Civil War? What were the economic? What were the military? What were the social? Well, when we look at politics, you look at the causes of the war. There was no national government to speak of. China was local. We talked about these ideas, the power vacuum, the fall of the Qing dynasty, dynastic rule. So you had major political issues going on. And add to that now, post-war, you are going to have massive disaster and destruction from not only, a long civil war, but remember, China was kind of trashed from World War II with the Japanese invasion. So also, here becomes a massive issue. To have a national government, what does Chiang Kai-shek do? Chiang Kai-shek tries to regionalize. He tries to take the region out of it, and he tries to nationalize. He tries to bring everybody together under him, that autocracy we talked about. He wants to be not a dictator, but he kind of does, because remember we talked about him admiring the Nazis. So he gets rid of a lot of regional people who can help a post-war government solidify and stabilize. And that's going to get rid of millennia of ideas. That, the Qing dynasty, previous dynasties, they ruled from a central government, but they had local and regional hubs that would act as their speakers, for lack of a better term. Chiang gets rid of a lot of those. So not only do you have the disaster that was China politically after the fall of the Qing dynasty, it's almost more of a disaster post-Chinese Civil War. Does the winner fix the political issues? Remember, the political issues was we want to get rid of the power vacuum and we want to bring China together under a strong national government. Does the winner, the Chinese Communist Party, fix these issues of weak national government and a power vacuum that people are trying to take up? The answer is yes. And the answer is the CCP and Mao do it rather quickly. They create a massive centralized national government. And to do that, they roll out regional governmental hubs, local governmental hubs, and they then send whatever issue or edict they want from a national government to a regional to a local. And these all are in a centralized power structure. This gets rid of the political vacuum. They proved they could do it in Manchuria. They did it in Yan'an. They did it in Harbin. They were able to consolidate their power and push out all their economic and social reforms they wanted to do. Now they're going to want to do it on a national level, and they actually do accomplishment. It's actually kind of crazy. Within 8 to 10 years, the CCP establishes a working constitution, a working body of laws, a giant central government with numerous ministries. Guys, a ministry is what some countries call department. So we have the Department of State, we have the Department of the Interior. They would have the Ministry of the Interior. And then they create tons and tons of regional and local governmental hubs that are all fully staffed, implementing the Constitution, implementing the laws, and basically implementing anything Mao and the central government wants. When you think of it, that's crazy after 50 to 60 years of just absolute political disaster. The question is, how does this happen? So not only was it a political disaster for 50 to 60 years, but remember when we talk and go all the way back from 1949 to the Opium Wars, which were the mid-18th century, China was kind of a political disaster for close to 100 years. Mao fixes all this political problem, power structure, weak national government, all this power vacuum issues we talked about. Mao and the CCP does it in 8 to 10 years. How is that humanly possible? It seems inconceivable, if one might think. Well, how do they do it? Well, it's very simple. They do it by power consolidation. You have to have everybody believe in your one idea, or else they're going to die. So that's the first thing you're going to see. The first thing you're going to see in the first 8 to 10 years to create this constitution, create these laws, to create these regional and local hubs, you are going to see a massive, massive, massive power consolidation under the CCP and especially Mao. They are going to run numerous campaigns, they're going to call them. So first campaign they're going to run from about 50 to 51, 52 is going to be this idea called the Campaign Against Counter-Revolutionaries. There was still urban areas in the South and especially on the coast that were overtaken by the CCP, but were not totally instilled with CCP ideology. There was riots, there was food riots, there was political riots. In other words, the cities were not on the same page as the rural areas as totally being behind the communist takeover. To do this, Mao starts pushing out his ideology, and they start rooting out what they will call counter-revolutionaries. They find anyone and everyone speaking out against the CCP, and Mao and the CCP will hold massive trials, public trials. Remember, we talked about this. Now Mao's in power. Now the CCP is in power. Mao is going to love public executions now because it's going to show that they are in power. Remember, we talked about guerrilla warfare. Before 1949, don't want public executions. Want everything on the sly. Want everything, any kind of re-education, any nastiness you want behind or under or hidden, because you want that propaganda of we are here for you. This is a people's war. Now we're in power. Now we want these public ideas that if you're not behind this, it's going to be a problem. Again, massive trials with massive public executions being held in the massive soccer stadium they have in Beijing. So he wants these things to, like, if you're not behind us, you're going to be underneath us in the ground. So when you all talk about it, the campaign against counter-revolutionaries, as Mao is trying to consolidate his power within the CCP in the country and getting rid of any KMT sympathizers or even anyone who doesn't believe in communist government, you're looking at, and again, guys, numbers will vary. We don't have exact numbers because Mao, in fact, writes the history in the late 60s. You're looking at anywhere between 500,000 and 2 million killed or re-educated in this campaign to consolidate the power and create this stable government. So does he do it? Does the stable government get created, as we said on the last slide? It absolutely does. The question is how. Well, from 1952 to about 1954-ish, Mao will run 2 more campaigns. It's called the 3 anti and the 5 anti campaign. The first to come is the 3 anti. The 3 antis: anti-waste, anti-corruption, anti-bureaucracy. And it's the old bureaucracy. It's the old way. So again, rooting out, finding people who aren't behind the CCP totally and Mao totally, getting rid of them. 5 antis are anti-robbery, anti-stealing, anti-cheating, anti-theft, and anti-taxes, guys. Kind of almost anti-capitalist, one would say. When you look at all of these campaigns, again, you're going to have public executions, public rooting outs. Rid China, rid the CCP, i.e., consolidate the power behind the CCP of any enemies of the state. Now, corruption is going to be the word they use, but they're looking for anyone who's an enemy of communist China. And it's really going to be a targeting of anyone who does not like Mao and the CCP, and anyone who believes in capitalism. Nobody knows the numbers here because, again, the numbers are hidden. But the numbers you can find out there when you do numerous rounds of research, when you talk, the people that were re-educated, and then no one was executed per se, but there were tons of suicides. People were falling out of windows. People were hanging themselves. People were shooting themselves, is what you will find. They put the number at the millions that were re-educated or killed or suicided. So you're looking. We don't know the numbers. You could be anywhere from 2 million to 5 million between 49 and 52 that you're talking are gone now as you consolidate the power to create this stable government. As he continues his power consolidation, so now what you're getting is into 57-ish, let's say, you're going to get some people speaking out like, wow, 5-6 million killed, suicided, re-educated. I don't know if this is what we signed on for. So there's an old Chinese proverb that basically says, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. It's an old Chinese proverb going back thousands of years into the dynastic era that basically is saying, let's talk about things to make our country better. So Mao uses that old saying into what he will call the 100 Flowers campaign. And what he says and what is being seen in the propaganda putting out is he wants people to say, how do you think this is going? Please give us feedback. How do you believe the party, the Communist Party, Mao, me, is performing right now? Let's just hear you out. Maybe there's some things we can do better. What this really is, and if you look at it, I found a primary source somewhere, but I couldn't find it again. Mao says to some of his inner circle, he's trying to weed the snakes out of the grass. So nobody really knows how many lost their lives in the 100 Flowers campaign, but it's a lot. And it's mostly intellectuals, it's mostly scholars, it's mostly thinkers. Here's the thing. Remember, we're going to get to economic. One of the things that wants to be done here is bring China into a modern country. Well, who's going to help you? The people who have educated themselves, the people who've gone to university, the intellectuals. They're the ones that are kind of gone from the 100 Flowers campaign, so keep that in the back of your mind. The numbers, again, we can't find. Anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million are re-educated or are publicly executed. So guys, keep putting these numbers together. We're up there close to 7-8 million in less than 10 years that are re-educated or executed. Another campaign in 57 is called the anti-rightist campaign. They're trying to get rid of anyone that is rightist, i.e. capitalist, i.e. democratic, i.e. not the CCP. And by the end of 57, in addition to the 100 Flowers campaign, add another 500,000 to a 1.5 million that either have been re-educated or killed. Again, guys, keep the tab going. We are closing in on 10 million that are politically re-educated or politically executed in a power consolidation to right the wrongs per se of the war. The causes of political, we talked about that power vacuum, strong national government. We said Mao does it on that first slide. How does he do it? It's a lot of power consolidation. So now we're going to flip to economics. One of the goals was to bring China into the modern era and a strong economic country. Problem is, yeah, there's a ton of bad stuff going on. We talked about hyperinflation last year, rampant hyperinflation during the Chinese Civil War, kind of sort of what we learned about in the Weimar Germany, where they could use the money to heat themselves if they wanted. The money was basically worthless. Prices were ridiculous. What happens? Well, Mao and the CCP, again, communism is a very strict economic system, strict regulation of the economy happens, and to bring this hyperinflation under control. In 1949, immediately, land redistribution was one of the big platforms of the CCP, which sounded great to everybody. So in 1949, Mao and the CCP announced immediately they will collectivize land. 5 to 15 families will come together, share all their resources and their land, and farm and do whatever they need to in a 5 to 15 family co-op, we'll call it, or cooperative, or commune even, if you follow the wording here. And these do become larger, and by 1956, these co-ops or communes consist of 100 to 300 families. Guys, think about that. I live in East Brandywine. There's probably 300 families in East Brandywine, maybe 500. So imagine the township you live in, Euclid, wherever, West Bradford. Imagine that these places, Lionville, whatever, every family comes together, has no private property, and does everything together for the good of the community, thereby the country. You farm together, you go to school together, you eat in common mess halls together. So these are things to think about. In 1958, private ownership of any land is completely abolished, and you will see giant co-ops like we just talked about. It is completely a try at total communism, like really ideological, not realistic communism. People are forced into it because we saw what happens if you go against, think of the previous slides about power consolidation. What happens if you don't go along with it? Well, you're going to be one of the almost 10 million that go bye-bye politically. So let's not go bye-bye economically. Peasants are forced to join the collectives, and they do if they like their lives. So then Mao rolls into what will be a first 5-year plan. They will model this after Stalin and the Soviets' 5-year plan to rapidly industrialize. But remember, here's the problem. At least Russia had cities where there was industry, and Russia's revolutionary base was the industrial worker. China has way, 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 way less industry. So they're going to try and transform the economy from an agrarian, semi-feudal, capitalist economy, which was very corrupt, to a communist, industrialized economy. And they didn't really know how to do it. They looked to the Soviets and they said, well, maybe here's how we do it. Maybe we do some agriculture, some industry, some ironworks, some I don't even know, manufacturing. So don't think of it as a plan like the Soviets. I mean, let's remember, Stalin had a plan. He had many 5-year plans. Mao is modeling it after the Soviets, but it's kind of like, well, let's try it and see if it works kind of thing. It doesn't work that great. Let's just put it that way. Which does bring us in 1958 to one of the major initiatives economically to bring China into a modern country. Remember, one of the causes of the war was China wasn't modern. Mao's going to try and fix it. From 1958 to 1961, you will have what he calls the Great Leap Forward. The big idea of the Great Leap Forward is to rapidly industrialize and develop the agriculture to feed a growing population. So what happens now? You go to real deal communism. This is ideology. This is pie in the sky. This is we are definitely going to do this. It has no historical precedent. It has no way of knowing it's going to work out. But up to 5,000 households. Now, I would tend to gather that if we put a bunch of townships in Downingtown together, you're going to have 5,000 households. Imagine all of those households, all of those families coming together with no private property whatsoever. You do everything together. You work together, you farm together, you eat together in giant communal mess halls. Imagine if Downingtown East, Downingtown West, and STEM was just a place you went to eat. That's where everyone ate in Downingtown. Oh, and by the way, Mao, to keep everybody happy during this, says there's no limits on how much you can eat. You can literally eat as much as you want. That becomes an issue. So what happens here? Well, we're going to have a massive, 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 massive issue. The Great Leap Forward is going to be an abject failure. They really don't have a lot of leadership. They really don't have a lot of coordination because they're purging so many people. And they lack a lot of common scientific sense. So first thing is we want to beat the U.S. and Britain, and we want to come up to par in the Soviet Union in industry. Well, a lot of that is based on your iron production because you need iron to build cars and trucks and iron to build massive structures like skyscrapers. Remember, you need reinforced concrete, which is reinforced with iron. So they're not, they're going to try and create some massive ironworks throughout the country, but then to keep doing it, Mao says everyone is going to be responsible to create iron. There's over 600,000 backyard furnaces. Literally imagine if, the President of the United States said, you got to create a backyard furnace. In your backyard, you got to create an iron smelter and make iron for us. How do you think that's going to work out? Especially if you have peasants that have never been educated. It doesn't go well. Lots of deaths, lots of exploding furnaces. And if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see there's stacks of iron bars there. Not bad. But if you know anything, and you can ask your engineering teachers or your science teachers, it's pretty exacting ratios to get really strong steel or iron. It's not very good. It's brittle. It cracks. It's pretty awful. So that's a pretty awful idea. So not only that, but remember, this massive industrialism is also trying to go with massive agricultural growth. They start massive irrigation projects to irrigate more fields so they can grow more crops. Here's the problem. You got over 600,000 backyard furnaces operating. You have tons and tons and tons of people trying to industrialize, millions. And now you have millions working on irrigation projects to get to the farming. Problem is, not a lot of people are actually doing the farming. They're getting ready to farm. They're irrigating the fields. But they don't know how to irrigate, number one, because remember in the 100 Flowers campaign, Mao kind of kills all the people that are educated. So they kind of just dig giant ditches to get water from rivers to fields. Nobody's really farming. And if you now look up, remember I said in the communes, there's no limits to how much you can eat. So everyone's eating their fill. No one's farming. And now they're digging irrigation projects. The rivers in China, like rivers everywhere, they have a tendency to flood during the rainy season. It's kind of a problem. When things start going south, now you go into craziness. Now Mao tries things like crop sorcery. He literally has wizards like preside over the field and sprinkle like pixie dust, literally. We will grow food. And they come up with this idea called deep plowing. What they figure is, crops must not be growing on the surface because the surface lacks nutrients. We will plow deeply. We will plow 10 to 12 feet into the ground, and that's where we'll plant our seeds. Here's the problem. Think of even a giant crop like corn. Corn grows very tall, maybe 6 feet. Think what I just said, maybe 6 feet. They're plowing 10 feet in the ground. The corn's never going to grow. So they plant wheat, they plant things in the ground. The wheat only grows up to 5-ish feet. It can't grow out of where it's plowed and where it's planted. Massive disaster. So what do you see? In economics and in social now, the Great Leap Forward is an abject failure. It leads to one of the worst episodes in Chinese history called the Great Famine. The Great Famine by many Chinese were called 3 bitter years. Nobody's really farming. They're doing all the craziness we just talked about on the last slide to rapidly industrialize. They did all these projects. It just didn't work out. It just got really, really bad. It was really poor planning. We just said they were so concerned with industrialization and projects to get to farming that nobody was concerned with farming. They set ridiculous numbers. Let's remember back to the Cuban Revolution. Remember one of the things that Castro tried was the year of the 10 million. 10 million tons of sugar. They actually got close, if you remember, but that's a really high number. Mao and the CCP are setting ridiculously high production numbers for industry and agriculture. Well, here's the problem when you're in a government like this, when you just watch 10 to 12 million of your people get executed for not getting along with the party. Well, in those regional and local hubs we talked about, when national or high ranking members would come in and say, are we meeting those numbers? What would you say? Would you say no? Because what happens to people that say no, or what happens to people that question? They go, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, we're hitting them, we're doing great, we're doing great. Well, so now you go back to the central government and you say, yep, we're hitting all the numbers. Well, then the central government and Mao go, well, that's awesome. If they're doing that, they can do more. They set the numbers higher, which they're not even getting close to the original numbers. So it's just awful. So whatever they think they're producing, they're not. And remember back to the communes, they're allowed to eat as much as they want. So what happens? Oh, yeah, you can keep eating, we're producing. No, you're not. To make matters worse, when things start really going south and them realizing that they don't have the food they thought they had, instead of trying to fix it, what always has worked? Well, what worked going into this? Remember the number one guerrilla war thing? Propaganda. Well, let's throw some propaganda at them because they'll believe that. So if you look at the pictures, these are propaganda pictures I was able to find of the Great Leap Forward leading into the Great Famine. Mao will take pictures like you see at the top right in fields of wheat that look beautiful. You'll see, pictures like you see in the middle, just tractors getting ready to go out and harvest that food. They'll go as far as creating fake villages where they will funnel food to these villages. Look at these kids right here. These kids look healthy. They look happy. And they probably are, because it's a village of about 1,000 that's getting fed for propaganda purposes. That is not what it looks like. Imagine those kids right there that weigh 60 pounds, drop 40 pounds off of them. Yeah, they'd weigh about 20 pounds. They're in starvation everywhere else except for these pictures. So not only that, as you see, I just talked about the overconsumption in the communes. Well, now the cities are where your national governmental heads are going to be and some of your people high up in the party. So now they're going to start funneling food to the cities first, which is going to lead to poorer, more terrible conditions in the rural areas. Now, not only that, add to the fact that in the Great Famine, you're actually going to have awful luck. There's going to be huge natural disasters. 1.5 to 2 years, there's going to be a massive drought where there's no rain, so nothing can grow. But then come the floods. It's going to rain so much, it's going to flood. Remember those irrigation projects? They didn't plan correctly. Now, any food that was going to grow is flooded out. You want to talk bad luck? There's an actual swarm of locusts that descends on some of the crop fields that are actually growing that eat all the food. Interestingly enough, then Mao gets a little crazy again. They believe, and Mao believes, and funnels it to the top members of the party, one of the biggest problems must be sparrows, because sparrows, we have a lot of them, and they must eat a lot of food. So they are what's decimating our crops. One of the things that's decimating our crops. So Mao actually starts an anti-sparrow campaign where they go out and they slaughter sparrows all through the country. Here's the problem. Sparrows, I'm sorry, I was going to click there. Sparrows actually are omnivores. They eat everything. Sparrows actually help kill rats because they will kill them. So now when you don't kill enough rats, now the rats come in and eat all the food you have anyway. By the way, they did have, you see at the top there, they were exporting grains to the Soviet Union to pay back loans to fight the Chinese Civil War and get the country started in the early 50s. Do you see how this kind of sucks? So what happens? You have Great Leap Forward equals the Great Famine. What happens? You saw all the stuff that happened in the Great Famine, which equals nobody's eating. Grain production goes down 70% in 2 years while the population is going up. That's bad. At the end of the day, from the Great Famine, numbers vary, but you're looking at, in addition to anywhere from 8 to 12 million political re-educations and political executions. You're looking at anywhere from 8 to 12 million were killed by Mao because they were against the party in those first 10 to 15 years. The Great Famine will produce anywhere from 23 to 42 million deaths from starvation. And remember, starvation is a pretty awful way to die. Because it's so bad, People are committing suicide this time, but they're also speaking out about how bad this sucked and how stupid the Great Leap Forward is. You have another 3 to 5 million that actually will commit suicide or will be called committing suicide or are just outright killed in public for speaking out. Not only that, but when you lose so many people to famine, remember when you're not eating, also your body shuts down. Your natural things you do aren't going to happen. Your reproductive system shuts down. So what you look at also is it's an estimated loss of 40 million people that get lost in the Chinese birth rate. So when you look at this, from the Great Leap Forward, you lost a possible 80 to 100 million. And that 100 million, I know if you're doing the math, it doesn't add up, but add 23 to 42 mil plus 3 to 5 mil plus anywhere from 10 to 12 mil leading into this. The numbers, we can't find them. 80 to 100 million lost in the first 15 years of CCP rule. And guys, I have their insert terrible photo here. Well, remember what happens. I'm about to get to it. The Cultural Revolution. You can't find any pictures of the Great Famine because they're gone. If there was any pictures, Mao quickly got rid of them. Okay? So what happens? So by the way, Mao liked to call himself a helmsman. He liked to consider himself the captain of ships. He was infatuated with water. So what happens after the Great Leap Forward, which equaled the Great Famine? It is outside of our study, but I've talked about it, so it's a good idea to know. Mao starts the Cultural Revolution in 1966. So again, guys, we're talking only 15-ish years since the CCP has taken power. You've lost about 80 to 100 million people from the Great Leap Forward, the Great Famine, and all those political executions. That's a lot. So as I've talked about before, the people who supported the CCP, the people who fought these battles in the 40s to get China to where it's at, just watched 80 to 100 million people die. They're a little annoyed. The people that lived through this are a little annoyed. So they start speaking out and they start questioning the direction of the country. Mao doesn't like losing credibility. Mao doesn't like being questioned. So what happens? Mao goes crazy. This is where Mao rewrites history. This is where Mao has, 120-foot pictures of himself painted. This is where he makes the little red book, which is a quotations book, which in the upper picture, that's what they're holding up. This is where if you don't carry that book of quotations by the chairman Mao, also known as the little red book, if you don't simply carry that book on your person at all times, you might be executed. You can Google and you can find pictures of police officers standing in the background while Red Guard, by the way, were majoritively the youth. He recruits the youth because they're impressionable. The older generation remembered what was supposed to happen and what didn't happen after 80 to 100 million were killed. So the Red Guard is running around killing people. The police and the military are watching because Mao's letting it happen. It's really bad, and you're talking a lot more get killed. 2 million are executed, possibly, and the number you can find out there, millions are re-educated, because if you don't get re-educated, you're going to die. So there's more in the first 20 years that are bad. So when you look at it politically and economically, it's kind of a disaster. Is it a disaster politically? Not really, because he consolidates power. Economically, pretty traumatic. Guys, the military is super stable. The Red Army has always been the military arm of the CCP. Remember, they were one, and they were always one. The CCP is the party. The PLA is the military arm of the party, but they're together. So the military was always super stable. The military always grows, and the military is where the Communist Party derives its power, because it's really hard to, kill, like 15, 20 million people and starve another 80 to 100 million people if you don't have a really good army. So that's kind of a thing. Social reforms, do they happen? Absolutely. That's one of the things. Remember, if you're ever stuck in a timed writing, if you're talking about a communist revolution, remember one of the things about communism is everyone is equal. So you can lean on some equality always. Women do receive some rights. Guys, in the imperial China history, it was legal for a man to be polygamous. That means marry many women. Women weren't allowed education, and it was only the man who could divorce, because women were held to a very, very low social standard, unfortunately. The Communist Party does give women the right to divorce. You fast forward 5 to 8 years, they make polygamy illegal for men. You can only marry one woman, and they try and give women equal education. Now, it's not necessarily secondary education like you're sitting in high school. It's definitely not college, but at least for primary school, think elementary education. Women are entitled to an equal education, at least in primary school. So there is some increase in social standing for women. Um, as we talked about with the Cuban Revolution, there is a big push to educate the populace. Um, and as evidence of this, it did work. Literacy rates went from in 1940s all the way up to 1970. Your literacy rate went from about 20% of the population in China could read to 93% literacy. So that's pretty darn good. Um, Life expectancy did go up about 20 years from 1940s to 1970s. Now, here's the thing: the life expectancy is counting the people that actually live, not the people that now executed. If you were to put that in there, this number would go down. But if you weren't pissing off the Communist Party, i.e., pissing off Mao, that means that the life expectancy went up, which is good. Let's be honest. You all can always measure a country by its infant mortality or child mortality, how many kids survive to adulthood. Infant mortality was either 20% or upwards of 30%. Some statistics say in China in the 40s and before the 1940s. The data you can find of the 70s and 60s is that infant mortality drops to about anywhere from 7 to 12%. But again, that data is getting reported by the Chinese Communist Party, and also the Soviet Union is releasing some of that data. Both communist countries that want to make their country look awesome, but it is a statistic you could point to. Was there industrialization? Yes, there was. China does start getting better in the 60s. So that does lead to slightly of an increase in life good per se. um, the economy was 3 times the size it was in 1960s, late 60s, as it was in 1949. The population does rise to 700 million. Now, that is a big deal, especially when you lost close to 100 million, if you include the loss of birth rate. And it does correlate to a drop in infant mortality. So again, that is questionable, but again, if you're doing your research and even looking from a scientific standpoint, a rise in population would equal a dramatic drop in infant mortality. And there is an issue that arises in the 70s. They create the China one-child policy. Some of you might have heard, because the population grows so much. They create the one-child policy. Couples can only have one child. Now, that becomes a massive issue socially. Now, guys, again, this is slightly out of the scope of what you need to know. But again, we like to bring you up to date on things in current events. One-child policy does erode Chinese social structure. In Chinese tradition, if you get married as a woman, you actually become part of the husband's family and you leave your family. And what the problem becomes there is that in China, there is no like old folks home. It is the children's job to take care of their parents in their old age. Well, if you have a daughter and she marries in the husband's family, guess who's getting taken care of in their old age? It's the husband's family, and the wife's family is left out to dry. So what happens is the one-child policy creates an even bigger emphasis on males in Chinese culture, and a lot of females don't get born. If you read into that, which is impossible to make happen since it's 50-50 usually, even sometimes females 51%, males 50%. So there's a lot of getting rid of female babies, which is really bad. There's a lot of female baby adoptions out of China for a good 20, 30 years. And this becomes a massive issue now, today, if you want to bring some of this stuff into modern day. Some statistics say there will be 30 million more men in China by 2020 than there are women, which will create some social unrest issues. So when we look at this, to wrap this up, was foreign influence gone? Sure it was. That was one of the problems, right? We said one of the causes should be fixed in a civil war. Foreign influence was gone. Absolutely. Was there a rise of nationalism? Absolutely, because if you didn't, you were kind of dead. Was there a power vacuum? No, there was not a power vacuum. There was actually the opposite of a power vacuum. There was a power consolidation. Because if you didn't get along with the CCP or you spoke out against Mao, you were pretty much dead. Um, were those social issues fixed? Kinda. We talked about that. We talked that last slide about how they did fix a lot of those social issues. Um, did they get rid of the corruption and the poor local leaders? They got rid of poor local leaders, that's for sure. Did they get rid of corruption? Well, if you're killing a lot of people and the cities are getting more food and the party is the ones in power, there's some corruption. Let's be honest. Um, is it a modern nation? Yeah. Getting into the 50s, not really. Getting into the 60s, not really. 70s, yeah, getting there. 80s, getting there. 90s, definitely getting there. Now, is it a modern nation? Sure it is. It took over 50 years, but guys, that's kind of what happens. Um, but at the end of the day, they did fix a lot of these issues, but at what cost? Lots and lots and lots and lots of repression, lots and lots and lots of executions, lots and lots and lots of re-educations. So did China fix these problems? Did Mao and the CCP fix the causes of the war? You could say they did, but at what cost is the problem. So when you look back at the Cuban Revolution, you would ask the same questions. Did they fix it? And I'm sure you could come up with similar answers in civil wars. Does the power that rises fix the problems? They probably do, but at what cost? And again, when you look at international wars, now do the problems really equal the solutions post-war? That's what you'll have to question yourselves on and maybe talk about in your group. So when we get to it, the exit understanding this time, guys, in groups of no more than 3, you're going to come up with a quick essay on the essential question. Here's the thing, guys. We're going to talk about this. Paper 1's coming up. Question 4 is basically an essay, but it's a super short essay. You really only have about 20-25 minutes if you're lucky to write this essay. No intro, just a thesis. You're going to be lucky if you have, not lucky, but you want to really get 2 solid body paragraphs that show, different perspective, et cetera, and then a quick conclusion, and you're out. Like, that's all you got. So what we're doing here is, instead of mocking a paper 2 here, think of this, because you could build this into a paper 2 easily. But what you're going to be doing for this exit understanding due by 3 p.m. Friday is you're going to answer the essential question with a thesis, no introduction, 2 body paragraphs with topic sentences, and then you need evidence and analysis to support that topic sentence. And moving on with life, 400 words about the word count, no less. If you go slightly over, we'll understand, but slightly over does not mean 800. Remember, some of you people, it means 400. Turnin to turnin.com. If you need to look at this, just pause the screencast here so you got it. But maybe this screencast will take you however long it took you, probably all of a class. Please try and do this quickly on Friday so you can leave about half a class again to work on your SOE. Or, if your group wanted to do this for, quote unquote homework, remember, there is no reading for next week. I would try and get this done coming, so you turn this puppy in, try and use Friday for your SOE, especially you guys that need it. It's due Monday. That was the whole plan, actually, between myself and Mr. Horseman. Hopefully the screencast would take a period. This would be a quick exit understanding activity you turn in. For Mr. Horseman, I believe it's going to be worth 10 points. For me, it's going to be worth 15 points. If you have any questions on the screencast, obviously ask us when we return. But try your best to do the screencast and get this in, hopefully, by Friday, so you can use all of Friday for your SOE. Or, it's going to be up to you if you want to use Friday for some of this and SOE, or maybe you're done your SOE, you can get done content terms, whatever. But please use your time wisely is what we're saying. Again, any questions, please come and see me or Mr. Horseman, depending on who you have. And hopefully this made sense and helped reinforce the readings and helped kind of wrap up the Chinese Civil War. We will be doing a big activity, project-y kind of thing next week to wrap up Chinese Civil and Paper 2 and World War II and Cuban Rev all together. So have a great couple days. Have a great weekend, and we will see you Monday.